An evil empire is sucking the life force from the planet, destroying all that's in its path. It's up to one soldier of fortune to save the world. If he succeeds, you survive. If he fails, you can always hit the reset button. Final Fantasy VII.
PlayStation.
I've said this quite a few times during the course of uploading video game reviews for this channel, but I have no choice. I have to say it again. What am I supposed to say about this one? I am about to embark on reviewing one of the biggest, most celebrated, most highly regarded games of all time. This game has set numerous records since its release, over 20 years ago, including being the best-selling game in the entire franchise, and being consistently voted as the greatest PS1 game of all time. Final Fantasy VII. Now, this is going to be a huge review. Not as in-depth as my Final Fantasy X review, but still, there's a ton of stuff to go over. So let's jump right in. Rewinding time back to 1997, I was but a mere 15 years old, still in high school, and the PlayStation 1 was the hottest thing to us video gamers. I had recently made the switch from the N64 to the PlayStation, as I felt the graphical presentation on the PS1 was much better, and to be honest, I never really had that many games for my N64. So the jump was made. A lot of the games I played in the beginning either were rented or borrowed from friends. Mostly, it was action games. Twisted Metal, Bloody Roar, Jet Moto. Then, I happened to be hanging out at a friend's house, and he had just picked up a new game, and it was sitting on a side table. The cover was mostly white. It was a thicker case, which meant multiple discs. So I turned it over to read the synopsis on the back. I was very surprised to find there really wasn't one. Just nothing. Just two generic paragraphs of rather unspecific information. I was intrigued, but I'll be honest, at the time, games with multiple discs really interested me. So that's what originally interested me in playing the game. No shit. Released in 1997 by Squaresoft, yes, there was a time before the Square Enix merger, Final Fantasy VII was produced and developed by some of Square's biggest and best game developers and designers. Truth be told, this was one of the last games produced by Square that featured series' longtime director and creator Hironobu Sakaguchi in a planning position. Also responsible on the creation side are other Square employees that would go on to direct and or produce and or have other very prominent roles in future titles of the series, including Yoshinori Kitase, Nobuo Uematsu, and Tetsuya Nomura, who was later responsible for the Kingdom Hearts series. I could sit and talk about the backstory and history of the production of this game, but honestly, I'd really love to one day. I mean, much like Final Fantasy X, I could talk about this game all day long. All day. But this is a review, not a history lesson, so let's get to it. The game begins in darkness, or more specifically, with the camera floating through a starry void, not to contradict myself. This is important to the overall main storyline of the game, as this starry space represents the beginning and the end. The story's main antagonistic force comes from space, and indeed, as the end of the game draws near, so does the game, or at least elements of it, return to this black expanse as well. You're introduced to a young woman, and then the camera pans really far out to reveal the city of Midgar, and the title reveal before zooming back in and joining the adventure. First section of the game, we are introduced to some of the main characters, including their protagonist, Cloud Strife, with his iconic spiky hair, and Barrett with his machine gun arm. They are on some sort of mission, and it turns out they are members of a revolutionary group called Avalanche, and their goal is to somehow overthrow or marginally disrupt the Shinra Corporation, whom they believe are evil and corrupt, which they are. Plus, they're possibly destroying the planet by siphoning off its energy, called Mako, to use in their own evil schemes. See, in this world, the planet, sometimes known as Gaia, is a living entity, with its lifeblood, known as the life stream, coursing through the planet, giving life to all things. Steal from the life stream, the planet dies. Understand? Just as all life stems from the life stream, so too, when someone or something dies, their energy returns to the life stream. So that sets up the basic premise of the entire game. However, just as in many Final Fantasy games, there's so much more to this story than meets the eye, and it all plays out over the course of the entire game. If I went into the complete storyline and everything that happens, I'd literally be here talking all day. So how's about an overview? You and your comrades will travel all over the world, that is, after spending several hours just escaping Midgar, visiting towns, villages, and coastal communities. You'll come across all sorts of funny characters, silly situations, battles, and revelations. Along the way, you'll end up losing friends as well, but more on that later. The majority of places you visit are teeming with locals, a lot of them having their own mannerisms and characteristics. This really fleshes out the world of Gaia and adds even more grandiose to your already long journey. Your party will be expanded through the various other playable main characters you meet along the way, most notably Kate Sith, a giant robotic cat, and Sid, who appears in almost every Final Fantasy game in some iteration. What seemingly began as a simple terrorist attack against a corrupt corporation, the game gradually evolves into a battle for the survival of the entire planet, far beyond the initial confrontations. The main character, Cloud, was part of a military force called Soldier, and one of his idols is another soldier member called Sephiroth. Well, it's shown in a flashback that on a previous mission, Sephiroth was thought to have been killed. This turns out to be untrue. Sephiroth shows up, but is acting weird. It's explained that, you know what? I'm not doing that. I'm not doing it. Because if I start explaining the story, I'll totally get carried away, and it'll take the next 20 minutes. So, I'm going to stop myself before I even get started and enjoy this compressed, simplified storyline explanation. 2,000 years before the events of the game, a meteor crashes on the planet. This meteor has biological cells hitching a ride on it, an entity, sometimes referred to as the Calamity from the Skies, later referred to as Genova. And that's one of those things, there's a lot of sort of funky pronunciation that a lot of people do with this game, like is it Genova or Genova? Because if you watch Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, they pronounce it Genova. Whereas I've always pronounced it Genova ever since I was a high school kid. But whatever. The native people of the planet at the time, the Cetra, gather around the meteor's impact point and attempt to heal the planet. The Calamity brings all kinds of deceit and treachery and transforms the native peoples into monsters. So the planet creates 6 weapons to protect itself, all named after precious stones: ruby, diamond, sapphire, ultimate, jade, and emerald. Well, mostly precious stones. Obviously, there's no ultimate stone in the real world, I guess. The Calamity is defeated and sealed within the impact crater where it originally landed. However, the majority of the Cetra are wiped out. The Cetra assimilate into human civilization as they become the dominant life on the planet. Fast forward till now. The evil corporation, Shinra Electric Power Company, uses its energy dominance to assert control over all people, and use the life stream as an energy source called Mako. Same thing with the pronunciation again. Is it Mako or Mako? Because when you're talking about the shark, most people say Mako, but a lot of times in referring to this game, it's pronounced Mako, so I'm just going to go with Mako for simplicity. They're so large, they've even developed their own army, called Soldier. The harvesting of Mako is killing the planet, while providing a better quality of life for those in the upper class of the city called Midgar. Shinra is the main antagonist of the game, and they're opposed by a small group of rebels known as Avalanche. Across the journey you take through roughly 30 hours of gameplay, yes, this game is long, you'll meet all the other characters. I think the first time I completed it, it took me maybe 38 hours, somewhere around there. Eventually you'll escape Midgar and make your way through the many towns, villages, and other areas. Gathering information, fighting members of Shinra and monsters, gathering items, including materia, and maybe even ride a snowboard or two. Eventually there's a little side character named Sephiroth who becomes the main enemy, even worse than Shinra. Without going into another backstory that's probably almost the same length as the main story, basically Sephiroth was another member of Shinra's soldier army, along with Cloud. Exceptionally gifted in all manner of combat and intelligence, he basically had a psychotic episode and cracked mentally, going rogue. Then, he went even more berserk when he discovered that he was a genetic experiment, created by Shinra using Genova cells. He then declares himself sorta king of the planet, since he considers Genova, the quote calamity from the skies, to be the true ruler of the planet. So he sets out to create all kinds of chaos and to help Genova reclaim the planet. That's the main storyline in the most succinct way I can put it. Cloud and Avalanche have to stop Sephiroth from releasing Genova to destroy the world, while fighting Shinra along the way as well. Please do not think for 1 second that the storyline in this game, as I've just told it, in any way does it justice, nor is it that simple. There's hours and hours of gameplay here, kids. The storyline in this game is tremendous, and you really need to play through it in its entirety to understand what I'm talking about. You have your standard turn-based combat winning battles. However, it's now been altered from previous games and is referred to as the Active Time-Based Combat System, or ATB. In previous installments in the series, you took turns. You would make a move, then the enemy would make a move. If you needed to go get a drink, or sandwich, or whatever in the middle of a battle, you could do so as long as it was your turn, because the enemy couldn't attack you unless you made a decision. The combat system in Final Fantasy VII changed that, because now it's active. Since it's active, it doesn't matter whether you choose a battle option or not. The enemy will still continually attack you. That was a pretty big change back then, and having played all the games in the series at this point besides 9, yes, let's not even go there, this radical change in the combat system was pretty well received. As for me, I personally prefer traditional turn-based combat, because it gives you time to think, and to strategize should you get into the shit. With active combat, you're just scrambling a lot of the time, especially on bigger boss fights and whatnot, to make decisions as fast as possible, before you get your ass kicked. Does it provide a faster paced combat experience? Well, yes, it does. Does it change things for the better? Well, that's up to the individual player. In place of the usual magical spells from previous games, we now have the new materia system. This allows players to gain and change what magical abilities they can yield simply by changing or modifying which materia spheres they have connected to their weapons or armor. Thus, there are no traditional classes in this game. Although there are slight variations on this anyways, with each character normally filling a specific role, i.e. Ares is usually the healer / caster, Cloud is mainly physical attacks, etc. Do I like the materia system? Call me old school, but no, I don't. I much prefer magic and spellcasting as it was in previous Final Fantasy games, where you could have multiple team members casting a variety of magic all the time. Which, on a side note, is why Final Fantasy V is my second favorite of all time, because of the job system. Anyways, on a plus note, the amount of spells in this game is huge, with many classic spells returning like Fire and Blizzard, but now we have newcomers like Comet and Mini. Materia spheres can be improved through usage, allowing access to more powerful versions of the base spell. Materia also gives the player access to summons, previously known as espers, which are large, complex, animated attacks, using usually gods or other huge creatures or beings that can cause tremendous damage to enemies or bosses. Most notably in this game is Bahamut Zero, which fires a laser beam from space! And of course, the ever-popular Knights of the Round, which lasts forever. Seriously, it's fun the first few times you use it, and it's, very effective against endgame bosses, but the fucking attack lasts like 10 minutes, and there's no way to skip it. There's a huge variety of weapons, armor, accessories, and other items you can pick up along your way. And the cool thing is that because of the move to 3D, when you change your character's weapon, the weapon model now changes too. Whereas in some previous games, regardless of what weapon you have equipped, the same sprite is always shown. There's limit breaks as well, which are basically super attacks that have to be charged up before you're able to use them. Chocobos return as well, and are primarily used as a means of fast travel when on the world map. Whew! But now that we got all that out of the way, let's move on to the fun stuff! Yeah. Well, even with a game as legendary as Final Fantasy VII, let's cut the bullshit and be honest. The game is 22 years old, and has aged like a fucking sealed can of dog piss left out in the woods of Kentucky for just as long. Yes, what I'm about to say may offend fans, may offend a lot of people, but I'm just trying to be honest and be myself here. The visuals, while memorable, look like shit. Sorry, they do. I know what Square was trying to do, and they were in virgin territory as far as 3D goes, and the limitations of the PlayStation. Yeah, I get that. But let's call a spade a spade. While some may view the primitive 3D models against pre-rendered backgrounds as cute, or nostalgic, or whatever, I don't. I really don't. As a die-hard Final Fantasy fan, well, until that abomination that was 15 came out, I try to find mostly positives about every game in the series. But I just can't look past this or gloss over it just because of its legacy. The blocky characters, the clumsy movements, the sort of meh backgrounds, I just don't like it. Even back in 1998 when I played the game, honestly, I really didn't like it then. I think that's mainly why myself, and probably many others around the world, have eagerly been awaiting the remake for so long, because this game really needs it. Many of the other titles in the Final Fantasy franchise have received updated graphical presentations on all sorts of different platforms. Sometimes, even when those are kind of blah, particularly with the updated versions of the Super Nintendo releases, which I felt didn't need overhauling in the first place. But let's get back on track before I go off on some tangent. The game, as previously mentioned, features 3D characters moving around in pre-rendered backgrounds. This means that the 3D objects move around in real time, whereas the backgrounds don't, i.e. you can't walk behind something just because it's there. You only can if the programmers intended you to. I've always felt this creates a jarring effect on me because I could never consolidate the two. Some of the backgrounds do look pretty good, even now, but then you have these stupid, blocky, Lego-looking motherfuckers running around the same area, and it just doesn't work with me. Again, I'm not a game programmer by any means, so I have no idea what Square could have done to better realize their vision, but this is what they did. The game is massive, spread across 3 CDs, and was the first multiple disc game I remember playing on the PlayStation. A decent chunk of the data space was reserved for the full motion video sequences, which, again, being honest, don't look that bad. Some of the character movements are a little slow, and sometimes things don't seem to move exactly right, but overall, I still like them. The battle sequences don't show any signs of aging, or perhaps they do, but mainly for me, I've never really noticed it. Because the battle sequences are still, to me, the highlight of the game. Some people like the story, the dialogue, the music. I like the battles. Now, one thing I've never been able to figure out, and might be one of those common sense things, is that if Square was able to make the battles in 3D, and they still look good to this day, why didn't they just make the whole game like the battles? They're not overly complicated per se. It would seem that the original PlayStation would have been able to do this, albeit with a little programming changes here and there. To me, if Square had done this little change, the game would have aged a lot better than I perceive it. The overall quality of the visuals in the game is on par of when it was released, but I feel like I could be nitpicky. I could say stuff like, why do some characters have mouths and some don't? Why do character animations look like they were animated at 10 frames a second? Why are the visual effects of many aspects so much higher quality than the characters or what else is going on around them? Probably one of the main things I'm personally looking forward to with the remake is the overall quality bump, where everything, the overworld, the characters, the battles, etc. are finally all on the same visual level, instead of this jarring difference between them as the original game has now. We'll have to wait and see. The audio side of things, I feel, is a much easier beast to talk about, as things like music and sound effects weren't pushed as far as the graphical side of things were back then. This was 1997, so there's no spoken dialogue yet. The sound effects, again, for the time, do their job well. It's not like you're supposed to expect the most bombastic explosions you've ever heard. Sometimes I think they use lower quality samples to save space, to be honest. The soundtrack for the game is considered by many to, again, be one of the best in the entire series. Once again, I disagree. Yes, the game features some very memorable songs and themes, but again, in order to save space for the full motion videos, they used MIDI in 1997. Was the PlayStation perfectly capable of using higher quality digital forms of recorded music? Sure it was. Did Square do this? No, they didn't. They programmed it so all of the music in the game is processed by the internal sound chip in the PS1, instead of being streamed from the disc in real time as a lot of other games did. requiring active processing time with the main CPU. Can't have everything, I guess. This was the first time I remember hearing the now iconic Final Fantasy Prelude theme, which I've always just considered the Final Fantasy main theme, as it's in almost every single game in the series. It's the simple piece of music that really captured me from the beginning, and I was hooked, before even playing the game itself. The majority of tracks in the game are nice and feature a wide array of styles and genres, from classical to grunge, atmospheric to industrial. Series composer Nobuo Uematsu considers this soundtrack to be his best achievement in his opinion. For me, again, because of the limitations of how they did the audio, it's not that I don't like the music, but some tracks can get very annoying because of how short they are. Thus, they're cycled endlessly. And keep in mind, kids, this game features cutscenes that aren't skippable, meaning if you're having a 20-minute conversation in the game with whoever, guess what? You're forced to listen to the same 2 to 3 minute piece of music repeating like 10 fucking times in a row. That's what really irks me about the soundtrack. Some are just so dull and tireless. I found myself dozing off many times during these moments because they're so damn dull. And there's no damn way around it. At least in later games, you can skip over cutscenes or exposition scenes by pressing start or something like that. Not the case here. There's no getting around it. I actually own the physical version of the soundtrack once upon a time, so I can't bash it too much. Overall, Final Fantasy VII is one of the greatest games of all time. Do I feel it's the greatest? No. Castlevania Symphony of the Night has that accolade for me. Is it the greatest Final Fantasy of all time? No. Final Fantasy X still holds the crown in my opinion. Is it a monumental achievement in game production that changed the course of future games to come? Yes, I think it did, because it did achieve quite a lot for the time it was released. It features a great cast of characters, an amazing storyline. Let's get that straight. Awesome themes, and a very enjoyable and unforgettable adventure that's hard to forget, even after 21 years. I don't really play it anymore, to be honest. I played through it to capture footage for this review, and that'll probably be the last time that I ever play the original. I just don't find that much enjoyment in constant replayability. Whereas with Final Fantasy X, I can play through that every time and it's a blast. Final Fantasy VII is a time capsule game, meaning it came out at a specific time in the chronology of video games where many different aspects came together to form something special. The problem is that it only existed when the game was released and doesn't apply anymore. After this review is completed, I'll probably never play the original release ever again, unless I'm feeling hyper nostalgic or something, or they re-release an HD makeover of it, which at this point is a pipe dream. With the remaster on the horizon, I doubt they'll ever give an HD redo a second thought. This applies to many games from many different time periods and consoles, and unfortunately, Final Fantasy VII is one of those. It just doesn't have the staying power, mainly visually, to combat the passage of time. Some people can look past this. I can't. I just can't. There have also been numerous expanded releases in many different mediums taking place within the Final Fantasy VII universe. Mainly the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, which features new games, stories, and other media across a few different platforms. And as I previously mentioned, Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, a CGI movie which takes place 2 years after the game does, and is just amazing to watch if you've never seen it. Over the years, there have been a few ports to other systems, mainly the PC port, which added higher resolutions across the board, and cleaned up a lot of the visual elements, and a few ports to portable platforms currently in use. It's a classic above other classics, and really helped put Square on the map, at least here in America. I have many fond memories of playing through it in my later teenage years into my 20s, and I'm glad I did, because it really helped introduce me, and I'm assuming, a large amount of North American players to the series. And it's a series that has become one of my all-time favorites. Thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, go check it out.